Welcome to First Parish Unitarian Universalist Canton. I am Elizabeth Foster, your ministerial intern, and I am joined this morning by Reverend Dr. Clyde Grubbs, who is behind me, who is our minister. First Parish Unitarian Universalist honors diversity, and we joyfully welcome all who share the values and principles of our congregation. Thanks. We had an announcement that the blanket that is under our candles this morning was made by a Navajo woman artist, and we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day this morning, so we just wanted to share that. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with my worship associate role this morning. We are so glad that you all have chosen to worship with us today, whether in person or on Zoom. And I am now going to read our call to worship. Which this morning is by Ponca Chief White Eagle. When you are in doubt, be still and wait. When doubt no longer exists for you, then go forward with courage. So long as mists envelop you, be still. Be still until the sunlight pours through and dispels the mists, as surely it will. Then act with courage. And I'm now going to invite up Kitty to help with our chalice lighting. Since ancient times, shamans, priests, and elders blessed sacred spaces as well as the communities that gathered in them. We Unitarian Universalists are convinced in the priesthood and prophethood of all believers, so we too gather together to bless this space and to light our chalice and to bless those of us who use it now and in the years to come. As we light this chalice, may we be a place of healing and a venue from which prophecies empower people to build just and beloved community. And before I read our covenant this morning, I just want to acknowledge that we gather here on the land of the Neponset band of the Massachusetts tribe. And now I invite you to read our covenants. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace with respect and understanding, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve our fellows and humankind, to the end that all souls shall grow together in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God, by whatsoever name we worship. Thank you for your patience this morning, and we will now sing our opening hymn, which is number 1073, which should be in your teal hymnal, and The Earth is Our Mother, and we're going to sing the first 3 verses this morning.
Many of us remember the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s and on and on. And one of the things that's not known as well is that at the same time there was civil rights movements among the Mexican American people and the Asian people and the American Indian people. One of those activists was Jimmy Durham. Jimmy Durham wrote this poem in his early 20s as they were fighting in that time to move from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, something that we've just begun to accomplish in Massachusetts. So this is from Jimmy Durham, and it's strong. In school, I was taught the names of Columbus, Cortez, and Pizarro, and a dozen other filthy murderers, a bloodline going all the way back to General Miles, Daniel Boone, and General Eisenhower. No one mentioned the names of even a few of the victims. But don't you remember Chesky, whose spine was crushed so quickly by Mr. Pizarro's boot? What words did he cry into the dust? What was the familiar name of that young girl who danced so gleefully that everyone in the village sang along with her before Cortez's sword hacked off her arms as she protested the burning of her sweetheart? And her sweetheart's name was Minnie Deeds, and he had been the leader of a band of fighters called the Red Stick Hummingbirds, who slowed the march of Cortez's army only a few spears and stones that now lay still on the mountains. And remember, Green Rock Woman was the name of that old lady who walked right up and spat in Columbus's face. We must remember that. Remember the laughing odor, the Tiano, who tried to stop Columbus and was taken away as a slave. We never saw him again. And in the school, I learned of heroes and heroic discoveries made by liars and crooks. The courage of millions and sweet and true people was not commemorated. So let us declare a holiday for ourselves and make a parade that begins with Columbus's victims and continues. Because isn't it true that even in the summer, the grass here whispers their names. Every creek was accepted the responsibility of singing those names, and nothing can stop the wind from howling those names around the corners of the village. Why else would the birds sing so sweetly? So ends the reading. And join me in our blessing. It's from All Our Relations by Eulalie. And it's done in one of the things you see a picture of. There's a painting, and it's made by missionaries, clearly, because it's a missionary painting of an American Indian praying, and he's got his head down and his hand tucked away, and he's praying. Except that's not the way American Indians prayed. They prayed with their hands up, looking into the sky, and raising their voices. So in that spirit, I will attempt to pray this prayer. It's called All My Relations. We call upon our elders, our wisdom keepers, to teach us our creation and of our past, that we may preserve it for ancestors yet to come. We call upon our relatives before us, generations and generations ago, who gave us so much wisdom and walked in the sacred way. We especially honor and give homage to the 150 million who were exterminated across the Western Hemisphere in the first 400 years since 1492. We remember always the nations extinct due to mass slaughter, slavery, deportation, and disease unknown to them, and to the ones who were subjected to the same treatment today, to those who survived the relocations and those who died along the way. We salute those who have kept their homelands and cherish them still, and to those who carry on the traditions and live strong among their people, to those who called out their communities by force, by economic necessity, and now through generations who no longer know who even they are, to those who search and never find, to those who turn away, the so-called non-accepted, and to those who bring us together, and to those living outside, keeping touch, the voice of memory, to those who make it back to live and fight the struggles of their people, to those who give up, to those who do not care, to those who abuse themselves and others, and those who revive again, to those who are physically, mentally, and spiritually incapable, to those who are physically, mentally, and spiritually incapable by birth or accident, and to those who seek strength in our spirituality as a way of life, and to those who exploit it, even our own. Those who fall for the lies and join in the dividing lines that keep us fighting amongst each other, and to the outsiders who step in, good or bad, and those who don't know what they are doing, to the leaders and prisoners of war, politics, crime, race, and religion, innocent or guilty, to the young, to the old, to the living, to the dead, and to those whose ancestors came across the oceans and have learned to love this land, and to those who are still learning, to our brothers and sisters in all living things across Mother Earth, to our beauty we've destroyed and denied the honor that the Creator has given each individual. The truth lies in our hearts. To all our relations, let us join together saying the prayers that must be prayed in the shared silence of this time. So be it. Amen.
This is now the time in our service where we lift up the generosity of all of you, members and friends and visitors. We need your pledges and your gifts to keep our doors open and our programs vibrant. And our Faith in Action this month is the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and they are, just let me know that they are collecting urgently for humanitarian efforts to address the crisis in Burma, among many other programs that they do, so you're very welcome to give to them as well. And for those of you participating remotely this morning, you may contribute via PayPal or you can mail your contribution to the church. And there's going to be more details about that in the Zoom chat as well. So for the offertory, we will be singing number 305, De Colores.
So this story originates in the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada. If you know the Great Lakes, if you look at a map, you can see it stretches a long distance. Lake Superior is way out in Minnesota, and it goes all the way to New York. And this story, therefore, is told by indigenous peoples all over the Great Lakes. But there are different versions because they're different. They don't actually speak the same language. So they're different versions. But what connects these people is canoe. They can canoe from place to place. You can go from Lake Superior all the way to Lake Erie and just canoe. So there's a huge trade in goods and art and stories. So one day, in the very beginning of time, there was nothing but water on the face of the earth. There was no land, no plants. And the animals that did exist at that time on the earth were the animals that existed in the ocean, in the sea, the fish, and other aquatic animals. And flying just above the surface of the sea were birds who used the sea as a place to go hunting. So there's the earth, and all the animals live in the sky. And they want to come down, but there's nothing but water. They just say, hey, I can't go down because I'll drown. So one day, and we don't know how it happened, one day a hole opens in the sky. And a small object is seen coming out of the hole and falling in the hole. And as it gets closer to the earth, the birds and the fish are able to look up and say, that's a woman. Now, I don't know how they knew it was a woman, because they'd never seen a woman. But the story is traditional, and it went down, that they knew it was, well, whoever that was falling from the sky was going to fall into the ocean and hurt herself. So they started having councils. They'd talk to each other. The fish would talk to the other fish, and they finally talked to the birds. And the birds said, we will create a wind draft. So they started flying underneath the woman, and the wind would go up, 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 and she slowed down. And because she had her dance sprawl on, you could see her dancing in the sky, because on the top of the bird's wing. But slowly, she is coming down. And the birds are sending out messages, somebody catch her when she gets to the sea. Somebody. So the fish go running around saying, well, we can't really catch her ourselves. And then suddenly, out of the depths of the sea emerges a big, big, big turtle. And the turtle positions herself right underneath the falling woman. The woman's falling and falling, falling, falling. And she lands on the turtle's back. And in her hands, she has bags of seeds. And she begins to dance all around the turtle. Dance and dance and dance. And in her dancing, the turtle expands and soil appears on the turtle's back. And she scatters the seeds on the turtle's back. And by the time she finishes dancing, North America appears. North America appears, and the plants start coming up, and the animals who are in the sky start coming down, and she has danced North America into existence. Of course, they didn't call it North America. They call it Turtle Island. Turtle Island is the name the indigenous peoples of North America had for this stretch of land between the Pacific and the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and even to the ice that's way north. And from this woman's dancing, there's more stories, but we're not going to tell them all today, about human beings coming and plants coming and animals coming and all kinds of stories. But all because the birds broke her falling, the turtle catched her together. And one of the experiences one has in many of these stories is the creation of the world as we know it is a cooperative adventure. It's not just 7 days and words like, let there be light. It took a little work, a little dancing, some dancing to make the world. So I'm going to go directly into our sermon. Once upon a time, in a land, an island really, not very far away, the way a hurricane travels, 3 days maybe. A sea captain sailing under the Spanish flag came ashore on Gonehana, as its inhabitants called their home. Columbus named it San Salvador, Holy Savior in the English language. The official Spanish narrative reads, shortly after landing, many of the island's inhabitants assembled on the beach, and Columbus gave them gifts of red hats and beads. The natives reciprocated with gifts of parrots, cotton, and other goods. And then it reads, they go naked as their mothers bore them, but so do the women, although I do not see more than one girl. They are very well made with very handsome bodies and very good countenances. Columbus actually calls them sweet people. Then Columbus observed, they will make great slaves. After taking gifts from the native Taino, the Spanish performed a ceremony to take possession of the land for the King and Queen of Spain, acting under the international laws of Western Christendom. Central to this ceremony was a reading in Spanish, which the natives did not understand, instructing the Tainos that they were subject to Isabel and Ferdinand, and were required to submit to their church. Resistance, this proclamation said, resistance would mean rebellion. Rebellion would mean war. And in a war, Spain would be required to subdue them and confiscate their property and enslave them. That was the law, Columbus proclaimed in Spanish to the people who had no idea what he was talking about. There were 100 million people in the Western Hemisphere in 1492. 100 million people. It was about the same or slightly more than Europe had at the time, depending on whether you count Turkey as part of Europe. 100 million people who had developed complex civilization, advanced sciences, especially horticulture. Much of the food we eat today is first cultivated in this hemisphere before Columbus and was spread to the world through the Columbian trade. They understood the healing power of herbs, had insights into mathematics and astronomy that rivaled any people in the world at the time. Western Hemisphere societies were not primitive. In many ways, the societies rivaled Europe at the time, except Europe excelled at armor, guns, and it learned to use rudders for seagoing vessels. So many people ask, They ask, and I had children ask me so many times, how could America be discovered when people were already here? I'm going to go off for a second. There's a writing in Columbus's diary that indicates he saw people in Dublin, when he was visiting Dublin, that may have very well been American Indians who had crossed the ocean to Ireland. There was plenty of trade between the northern part of Europe, especially they were fishermen in Hull, Massachusetts, for example, 200 years before Columbus. So it wasn't like a secret that there was Leif Erikson went to set up a fort in New York Harbor for a few months. How could America be discovered when people were already here? Not many people are aware that this act of discovery and possession is based on a legal doctrine known as the doctrine of discovery, the doctrine of Christian discovery. Even fewer people realize that today, 5 centuries later, U.S. laws regarding the indigenous peoples of this country are based on this legal doctrine, which is quoted constantly by the Supreme Court and by courts in making decisions. And they call it the discovery doctrine, or the doctrine of discovery. The same doctrine of discovery is the basis of laws that deny the rights of the indigenous peoples of the entire Americas, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In 2012, in preparation for our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, our partners among the human rights organizations in Arizona, as well as Native American nations in the United States, asked Unitarian Universalists to examine this doctrine of discovery. They had also asked the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, etc. They believe that through an examination, the Unitarians will better understand how genocide and slavery was justified by Europeans, and how that justification gave rise to what we now call racism. They hope that this would help us as a faith community to have a deeper understanding of migration and border issues. So that raises the question, what is the doctrine of discovery? Let us begin by examining papal document issued 40 years before Columbus's voyage. 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued to King Alfonso V of Portugal the bull Romanus Pontifex, basically declaring war against all non-Christians throughout the world, instructing the conquest, colonization, and enslavement of non-Christian Africa. So discover something, enslave the people. So in 1452, European Christendom began launching crusades. In 1452, European Christendom had been launching crusades for 400 years, since 1052. Crusades against Muslims, crusades against Jews, crusades against those who followed the indigenous religions of Europe, the people called pagans. Based on the 4 centuries of wars, non-Christians were considered enemies of the church and as such less than human. According to the bull of 1452, Pope Nicholas directed King Alfonso to capture, vanquish, and subdue the Saracens and pagans and other enemies of Christ and put them into perpetual slavery, and to take all their possessions and property, take everything away from them and make them. And now listen to this. Given this commission, Portugal began to capture African slaves by making discoveries along the western coast of Africa, claiming those lands as Portuguese territory. Portugal got rich. Crusaders had always made a little money crusading, but Portugal's crusade against Africa turned Lisbon into one of the wealthiest countries in Europe. So now, let us fast forward 40 years. Move through history 40 years, and you can imagine Spain getting jealous of Portugal. And Columbus sailed west in 1492, and he was authorized to take possession of any lands he discovered that were not under the dominion of any Christian ruler. Thus, the following established precedent of Christian discovery. It meant conquest, slavery, and genocide against any people who were not under the rule of a European monarch. So yes, Columbus sailed with a mandate. His commission did not read, "Find a shortcut to India." This was a story I was told as a child, maybe you were too. Go find some spices. No. His commission was clearly read, conquer somebody, claim lands, enslave people. But now you're getting the plot of the story. Columbus returned to Europe. Pope Alexander VI issued a new papal document called Inter Cetera, granting to Spain, at the request of Ferdinand and Isabella, the right to conquer lands which Columbus had already found, as well as lands that Spain might discover in the future. By issuing Inter Cetera document, Pope Alexander stated his desire that the discovered people be subjugated and brought to the faith itself, and by this means Christianity would be propagated. This has really very little to do with Jesus. This has to do with power. It has to do with emperors. From the point of view of the Europeans at the time, the law of nature asserted that so-called Christian nations had a divine right, a divine duty, based on the biblical passage, go out and baptize all peoples of the earth, to claim absolute title to and ultimate authority over any newly discovered non-Christian inhabitants in their land. Over the next several centuries, this meant that Spain, Portugal, England, France, Holland also claimed the right to discover lands and conquer them in the name of Christ. The Puritans who came to New England had a mandate to spread the gospel. That's what they said. In 1423, the United States Supreme Court, 1423, this is 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, basically. 1423. 1823. Supreme Court in Johnson versus McIntosh, Chief Justice Marshall observed that Christian nations had assumed dominion over the lands of America during the age of discovery, and that upon discovery, the native peoples of this land, the Indians, he called them the Indians, had lost any rights to ownership of that land and only attained the right of occupancy. So if you were indigenous American, according to the Supreme Court, you had the right to tent, put up a teepee, something, but you didn't own the land. The land had to be owned by white people, Christian white people. In other words, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Indian nations were subject to the ultimate authority of the first Christian nation to claim possession of their land. And according to the Supreme Court, and according to what Marshall said, that was Great Britain. Great Britain had done that. Under Henry VII, they had sailed down from Nova Scotia and down to about Virginia, and a sea captain named Cabot had claimed everything. And then Marshall argues, this is the Supreme Court, that the United States, upon winning its independence in 1776, became the successor nation to the Discovery and acquired dominion from Great Britain. Marshall, in a Supreme Court decision, specifically cited the commission given by Henry VII to the explorer John Cabot in order to document England's complete recognition of the doctrine of discovery, which Marshall was now incorporating into U.S. law. Then, paraphrasing the language of the charter, Marshall noted that Cabot had authorized to take possessions of the land, notwithstanding the occupancy of natives who were heathens. And at the same time, admitting prior title to any Christian king who may have made a previous discovery. So if you were the king of some country in Europe and you had previously claimed the land, that counted, but not the fact that you had been here 10,000 years. That is the Supreme Court. That's still the law of the land. And using this principle of discovery as its premise, the Supreme Court stated in 1831 that the Cherokee Nation, and by implication all Indian nations, were not sovereign, but may perhaps be deemed domestic independent nations. So hundreds of Indian communities with thousands of people with long traditions have just been declared domestic independent nations by somebody in Washington whose family makes their living with slaves. That's who Marshall was. The U.S. Congress has taken this to mean that treaties made with Indian nations were subject to U.S. revision by Congress. Anybody read the Constitution? It doesn't say that. It says the treaties are sovereign between sovereign nations. But here it says Indian nations were to be considered legally like children, subject to congressional authority. The lawyers call this plenary power. Plenary power. It may not surprise you that the indigenous people of this hemisphere call it colonialism. Colonialism. Call it domination. Call it racist nonsense. The ancient doctrine of Christian discovery and its subjugation of heathen Indian is the law of this land right now, today. The government of the people, by the people, for the people, turns out to be some people. Picking up again, the workings of this doctrine in New England. The Massachusetts Bay Colony picked fights with the Wampanoag and Pequot and Massachusetts peoples so that they could be enslaved as rebels against Christian authority and shipped to the Bahamas, exchanged for African slaves who were brought to New England to provide labor for these colonies. So the way you acquired slaves in New England was to send indigenous people to be slaves in the Bahamas and bring slaves back from African slaves back from the islands. These are not the stories you were taught in public school. Our children learn a different story. And we were all children once. And we learn this story so well that it's deep inside us. Children learn a story of discovery and settlement, a story about how this land came to be white and Christian. Children learn a story about how the United States was civilized to the standards of Christian Europe. And this official story has had huge impact on the mentality of the people of the United States. If you believe that telling this story of Columbus sticking a flag in the beach and saying, "I've discovered America," you're saying that the earth is a thing to be owned, to be used, to be exploited. The people who greeted Columbus on that beach knew that they belonged to the earth. They knew that anything they did to the earth, they did to themselves. Thus, they understood that they were relational beings in relationship to their environment and to each other. Living in relationship to the earth and her creatures was life-giving, sustaining, and trying to own the earth, to control the earth, would lead to brokenness and ruin. So, 2012, the Unitarian Universalist Association repudiated the doctrine of discovery and promised we would tell the true story of this land. We agreed to seek to overcome the legacy of conquest and domination. We say that we live in a country in which church and state are separated. We say that. You probably said it yourself. That our laws are based on principles of human rights and justice for all. We say that a person has the freedom of religious expression and that no particular religion will be established that is given privileged institutional status. You were taught that in school. You would believe it. But all of us are learning in so many ways in areas of who can get married and who cannot, and whether a woman can have access to reproductive choice, and what is taught in our schools about the origin of life, the origin of the universe, what has been and continue to be subject to theological presumptions, churches telling legislators how to vote on the dictates of religious denominations. My friends, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religious expression. These are rights, not givens. We need to struggle for these freedoms. Yes, Unitarian Universalism arose as a cry for freedom, freedom of mind and spirit, freedom to side with love, but the doctrine of discovery continues to be the law of this land. It is the law that enables the government to disregard treaties and agreements with indigenous peoples. To side with love, to join in struggle, is to overcome this legacy of conquest, violence, and I ask you, ponder these things. Ponder these things in your hearts. It's called the Litany of Atonement. That is we talked about atonement a couple of weeks ago, the coming back to our just self. And Robbie Eller Isaacs, whose memorial service was just last month, wrote this, and it's been set to music. Someday we'll sing it. But I will read the bold, and you will read the italics. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible. For each time we have to strike out in anger without any just cause. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others. For selfishness that sets us apart and alone. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit. For losing sight of our unity. For those and for many other acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness. Now hear my benediction. We are seekers on life's adventure. We go forth together knowing the promise lies with each of us. May the Spirit that inspires both boldness and compassion go with you and be with you until we meet again. Go in peace and love. Amen.